My daughter called me on a Sunday afternoon, and I could hear a moving truck idling behind her voice. "Dad," she said, that same breezy tone she used whenever she was about to hand me a problem wrapped in a smile. "We closed on the new house in Charlotte on Friday. We're already unpacking. I meant to call you sooner." I stood on my back porch in Ohio, holding my phone against my ear, and I did not say anything for almost 6 seconds. I was doing the math. 600 miles. A closing that happens on a Friday doesn't happen without weeks of paperwork before it. Inspections, a mortgage approval, movers booked in advance. My daughter Rachel had not forgotten to tell me anything. She had planned this. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask her why. I said, "All right, sweetheart. Sounds like you've got your hands full. Call me when you're settled." I hung up the phone, walked back inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. "Before I tell you what I found that night, tell me where you're watching from. Son, daughter, doesn't matter. I'd like to know who's sitting with me for this one. And if you've ever had someone in your own family try to move you out of your own life without asking, hit that like button, because this one's for you." My name is Walter Grady. I'm 68 years old. I spent 39 years running a fleet maintenance company out of Dayton, Ohio, the kind of business nobody notices until their trucks stop running, and I built it from 2 bays in a rented garage to 11 locations across 3 states. I am not a man who reacts. I am a man who checks the engine before he decides what's actually broken. And that phone call from my daughter was the first sound of something grinding loose, deep inside a machine I thought I knew every part of. Rachel is 34. Her husband Todd works in what he calls consulting, which as far as I've ever been able to tell means he has a laptop and strong opinions. They have a 6-year-old boy, my grandson Eli, who used to spend every other weekend at my house until about a year ago, when the visits slowly started drying up, one excuse at a time. Todd's got a work thing. Eli's got a birthday party. "We're just so busy, Dad." I told myself that was just life. Young families get busy. I did not want to be the old man who calls his daughter needy for wanting to see his grandson. 10 months ago, Rachel and Todd sat across from me at my dining room table, the one my late wife Carol picked out 30 years ago, and Todd cleared his throat the way men do right before they ask you for money and want you to think it was your idea. "Dad," he said, "we've been looking at this whole life insurance and estate thing, and honestly, we're worried about you. You're not getting younger. If something happened to you tomorrow, would everything even be protected the way you want it?" I remember exactly how that landed, because it sounded less like concern and more like a sales pitch somebody had rehearsed in a mirror. Rachel took my hand across the table, and her eyes were wet, the way they used to get when she was 7 years old and wanted a dog. "Dad, we just love you so much, and we don't want anything to happen without you having everything set up right. There's this attorney Todd's boss used. He's very good, very affordable. He could just look over everything, make sure it's airtight." Carol had been gone 6 years by then, and grief has a way of leaving a door in you that other people learn to walk through when you're not looking. I said yes. Of course I said yes. What kind of father says no to his daughter holding his hand and crying about protecting him? 2 weeks later, I sat in an office downtown with a man named Preston Cale, sharp suit, softer handshake than I liked, and Todd sitting right beside me the entire meeting like he had a stake in it, which I suppose by then he already believed he did. Preston walked me through a stack of documents. He called it a revocable living trust, said it would avoid probate, protect the business from creditors, keep everything clean for Eli's future. He said the word protect so many times it started to sound less like a shield and more like a leash. I signed where he pointed. Rachel squeezed my shoulder afterward and told me she'd never felt so relieved in her whole life. I remember thinking, that's an odd thing to feel relieved about, my estate planning, but I let it go. I wanted to believe my daughter loved me enough to worry about an old man's affairs. Now she was standing in a driveway in North Carolina, 600 miles from that office, 600 miles from me, telling me almost as an afterthought that she'd already moved. I did not yell into that phone. I have built machines and businesses and a whole life on one principle. When something breaks, you don't scream at it. You take it apart and you find out exactly where the failure started. I walked down the hallway of my house, past the photographs of Rachel at her high school graduation, at her wedding, holding baby Eli in the hospital, and I went into what Carol used to call my war room, the small office off the garage where I keep every contract my company has ever signed, filed by year, filed by client, because a man who doesn't keep his own records has no business asking anyone else to keep theirs. I pulled the folder marked Estate, 2025. It should have held the original trust documents, the notarized copies, the durable power of attorney Preston Cale had drawn up alongside the trust, the one that would let Rachel handle my affairs only if I became incapacitated. The folder was there. The papers were not. I sat there for a long moment, with an empty manila folder in my hands, staring at the space where 6 months of my life should have been sitting, and a cold, sick feeling started spreading up from my stomach into my chest. I am a careful man. I do not lose paperwork. I remembered exactly the last time I had opened that drawer, back in March, when I filed the notarized copies myself and locked the cabinet the way I always do. There is only one other person who has ever had a key to that cabinet, because there was a night 4 months ago when Rachel came by unannounced, said she wanted to organize my files for me since I was, in her words, getting a little disorganized in my old age. She'd spent almost 2 hours alone in that room while I was out back fixing the mower. I hadn't thought a thing of it at the time. Fathers don't think much of their daughters wanting to help. My cell phone buzzed on the desk, and I nearly dropped the empty folder. It was a text from my bank, the kind of automated alert you get, maybe twice in your whole life if you're lucky. Security notice, it read. A request has been submitted to add an authorized user to your primary checking and investment accounts. If you did not initiate this request, contact us immediately. I stared at that message until the words stopped looking like English. I called the bank number on the back of my card, sat on hold for 11 minutes listening to elevator music while my hands went cold, and finally got a woman on the line who confirmed what I already knew in my gut before I ever dialed. Someone using my daughter's name and a copy of my driver's license had submitted a request that morning to be added to both accounts, and the request had listed a new mailing address, Charlotte, North Carolina. I sat back in my chair and looked at the empty folder sitting on my desk, and something in me went very quiet and very clear, the way it does right before you find the actual short in the wire. This had never been about protecting me. This had been about positioning. Rachel and Todd hadn't just gotten worried about my future and hired a lawyer out of love. They had built a structure, brick by brick, over 10 months, using my grief and my trust in my own child as the mortar. And now that the structure was finished, they had simply picked up and moved 600 miles away, confident that an old man alone in Ohio wouldn't notice what was missing from a drawer until it was far too late to do anything about it. I want to tell you, this is where the story gets hard for me, because what I remembered next wasn't even about the money. It was Eli, 6 years old, calling me Poppy, sitting on my lap while I taught him to whittle a piece of pine with a dull pocket knife, safer than it sounds, I promise you. I thought about how those visits had thinned out right around the time Preston Cale's office called to schedule that first meeting. I thought about how Rachel had stopped answering some of my calls the way she used to, always a text back an hour later. Sorry, Dad. So busy. I wondered, sitting there in that cold little office with an empty folder in my lap, whether any part of the last 10 months had been real, or whether my daughter had simply been managing me the way you manage a difficult client, warm enough to keep the account, distant enough to avoid getting attached to the man on the other end of it. I did not sleep that night. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying and sat back down at my desk with a legal pad and a pot of coffee. And I did what I have always done when something in my business went sideways. I made a list. Every fact in order. No feelings attached to any of it yet. Just the sequence. The dinner table conversation. The lawyer's office. The missing documents. The bank alert. The move to Charlotte announced only after it was already finished. By 4 in the morning, the list filled 2 full pages, and by the time the sun came up, I understood exactly what my daughter and her husband had built, and exactly what they thought they were going to get away with. The first thing I did that morning was call my own attorney, a woman named Diane Ferris, who had handled every contract my fleet company had signed for 22 years. A woman I trusted the way you trust, a tool you've used 10,000 times without it ever failing you once. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment on the phone, and then she said the words that steadied me more than anything else could have in that moment. Walter, whatever they signed with that other attorney, if you didn't authorize the specific powers they're now trying to exercise, and if documents were removed from your possession without your knowledge, we have real problems for them, not for you. Get in here today. I sat across from Diane that afternoon in her office on 3rd Street. The same office I'd been walking into since before Rachel was born, and I laid the folder, empty as it was, on her desk, like evidence, because that's exactly what it was. Diane pulled the original trust paperwork from her own archived files, because she'd insisted years ago on keeping duplicates of anything I signed involving major assets, a habit I'd once thought was excessive and now understood was the only reason I had a leg to stand on. She read through Preston Cale's language line by line, and her jaw got tighter with every page. "Walter," she said finally, "this power of attorney he drafted for you isn't a standard springing document. It doesn't just activate if you're incapacitated. There's a clause buried on page 11 that allows Rachel to assume financial control if two physicians, unnamed, unspecified, simply provide a written opinion that you're experiencing, and I'm quoting here, diminished capacity consistent with early cognitive decline. Walter, that's not protection. That's a trapdoor, and it's built to open whenever they decide it should." I sat there in that office and felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the floor of my own life shifting under me. My daughter and her husband had not just been planning to move away and quietly take control of my accounts someday down the road. They had built a legal mechanism that only needed 2 doctors willing to sign a piece of paper, doctors they could have found anywhere, doctors who had never even examined me. And just like that, on paper, I would cease to be a man capable of running my own life. And they were already 600 miles away, already inside my bank accounts, already rehearsing. I had to imagine exactly which version of concerned and loving they'd perform if anyone ever asked why they'd done it. Diane didn't waste time being angry on my behalf, which I respected more than I can say. Instead, she got to work. First thing Monday morning, we filed to revoke the power of attorney entirely, effective immediately, and she personally called the bank's fraud department and had the authorized user request frozen pending investigation, which stopped Rachel and Todd cold before they'd ever gotten a single dollar moved. Diane also pulled the incorporation documents for my fleet company and confirmed what I already suspected, but had never fully let myself think through. The revocable trust Preston Cale had drawn up named Rachel as successor trustee over the business itself, not just my personal accounts, meaning if that trapdoor clause had ever triggered, Todd would have effectively been running board decisions for a company I had built with my own 2 hands, starting back when Rachel was still in diapers, without me ever getting a say in it again. That was the moment something shifted in me from grief into something colder and steadier. Because that company isn't just money to me. 11 locations, 206 employees, men and women who have families of their own depending on paychecks I sign every other Friday. I was not going to let a smiling stranger in a sharp suit and my own daughter's husband hand that off to people who had proven, in 10 months flat, that they would use my dead wife's memory and my grandson's smile as tools to get what they wanted. I called Preston Cale's office myself, and I want you to understand, I did not call angry. I called the way I've called a vendor who shorted me on a parts order, calm, direct, and completely unwilling to be talked around. His assistant put me through after some hesitation, and when Preston finally picked up, his voice had that same practiced warmth I remembered from our first meeting. "Walter, so good to hear from you. How can I help?" I asked him one simple question. "Who referred you to my daughter and her husband?" There was a pause just half a second too long before he answered. Said something vague about a mutual acquaintance in the business community. I let the silence sit there after his answer, the way you let a customer sit in the quiet after you've caught them in something, because silence does more work than accusations ever do. Then I told him I'd be filing a formal complaint with the state bar regarding the diminished capacity clause buried on page 11 of a document he never once explained to me in plain language during our meeting, and that my attorney would be requesting his complete file on our engagement by end of week. He stopped sounding warm very quickly after that. 3 days later, my phone rang, and it was Rachel, and for the first time in 10 months, her voice did not sound rehearsed. "Dad," she said, "why did you freeze the accounts? Why did you call Preston? What is going on? You're scaring me." I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Todd had first told me he was worried about my future, and I said to my daughter, calmly, the truest thing I had said to her in almost a year. "Rachel, I found the empty folder. I know about page 11. I know 2 unnamed doctors could have decided I was losing my mind whenever it became convenient for somebody. I want you to think very carefully about your next sentence, because whatever you say to me right now is going to tell me everything I need to know about the rest of our relationship." There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I could hear Eli somewhere in the background asking his mother something about breakfast. And in that silence I understood, before she ever spoke again, that she was not going to tell me it was all a misunderstanding, because there was no version of that sentence that could survive what Diane and I had already found in writing. What she said instead, when she finally spoke, was that Todd had handled all the details, that she trusted him, that she never read the documents closely herself, that she'd signed where he told her to sign the same as I had signed where Preston told me to sign. And I want to tell you, some small, stubborn part of me almost let that be enough. She's my daughter. I held her the day she was born in a hospital room in Dayton, Ohio, and some part of a father never fully stops being that man in that room. But I have run a business long enough to know that not reading what you sign is not innocence, it's a choice. And choosing not to look closely at a document that hands you control over your own father's finances is not the same as being fooled by one. I told Rachel I loved her, and I meant it. Because you can love someone completely and still refuse to hand them the keys to your life. I told her the accounts would remain frozen against any further changes until my own attorney had fully reviewed every document Preston Cale's office produced, that I would be restructuring my trust with an attorney I actually trusted, and that the successor trustee on both my personal estate and Lawson Fleet Maintenance was being changed, effective immediately, to someone who had spent over 2 decades proving her judgment to me in ways that had nothing to do with a dinner table and a box of tissues. The following week, I sat in Diane's office and signed the new documents myself, page by page, reading every single line out loud before I put my name to it, a habit I intend to keep for the rest of my life. I named my longtime operations manager, a woman named Carla Jimenez, who started with me 20 years ago as a 19-year-old dispatcher and worked her way up through every single department in that company by sheer competence. As successor trustee over Lawson Fleet Maintenance, Carla had never once, in 20 years, asked me for anything beyond a fair wage and the tools to do her job well. And that, I have come to understand, is worth more than any amount of tearful hand-holding across a dinner table. For my personal estate, I set up a new trust with hard, specific, medically verified triggers for incapacity, 2 named physicians of my own choosing, a mandatory review by my attorney, before any control transfers to anyone, and a clause Diane insisted on that I have grown to love more than any other sentence in that entire document, that any beneficiary found to have knowingly participated in unauthorized access to my accounts or documents forfeits their inheritance entirely, in full, no partial penalties, no second chances. I named Eli, my grandson, as the primary beneficiary of a separate education trust that neither Rachel nor Todd will ever have any authority to touch or manage, administered instead by Diane's firm until he turns 25, because whatever his parents did, that boy is innocent of every bit of it, and he is still going to grow up knowing his grandfather loved him enough to protect his future from the very people who tried to steal mine. I did not press criminal charges against my own daughter, though Diane made clear I had grounds to. I want to be honest with you about why. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it wasn't weakness either. It was that I looked at a photograph on my desk of Rachel at 6 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair, and I understood that some doors, once you walk all the way through them, you can never fully walk back out of, for either one of you. I chose to leave that particular door only half open. Todd received a formal letter from Diane's office regarding the fraudulent bank authorization attempt, and I understand from a mutual friend in Dayton that he has not, since that letter arrived, been quite so eager to discuss anyone's estate planning at dinner tables. Rachel and I still speak, though less than we used to, and always now with a particular carefulness on both sides, the way 2 people speak after a car accident that was mostly one person's fault, but that both of them still have to keep driving past the intersection where it happened. She sends me pictures of Eli sometimes, a school project, a lost tooth, and I look at every single one of them, because that boy did not choose his parents any more than I chose to have a business worth stealing. I have not been to Charlotte, and I have not been asked to come. I still get up most mornings at 5:30, same as I have for 40 years, and I still drive out to check on the Dayton facility twice a week, even though Carla runs it better than I ever did at her age. Last month, I sat in my war room, the same room where I once held an empty manila folder, and felt my whole life tilt sideways. And I went through my files one more time, slower this time, more carefully, because I have learned something at 68 years old that I wish someone had told me at 40. Love does not require blindness. You can build an entire life around people you would walk through fire for, and still keep a lock on the drawer, still keep your own copies, still read every single line before you sign your name to anything. Because the people most capable of hurting you are never strangers. They are the ones who already know exactly where you keep your trust. I think about that dinner table sometimes, Todd clearing his throat, Rachel's hand warm over mine, both of them so certain, I have to believe, that an old man missing his late wife would simply sign whatever was placed in front of him if it came wrapped in enough affection. And I did sign it. That part is true, and I am not going to sit here and pretend otherwise, because pretending you were never fooled is its own kind of lie, and I have had enough of those in my house for one lifetime. But I found it. I read page 11. I called the bank, and I called my attorney, and I called the man in the sharp suit, and I took my company and my future and my grandson's education back out of hands that had already decided, before I ever caught on, exactly how the rest of my life was going to go without my permission. If somebody in your own family has ever tried to move you out of your own life while smiling the entire time they did it, I want you to hear this from a man who has been exactly where you are standing right now. Check the drawer. Read page 11. Keep your own copies of everything that matters, because nobody else is going to protect your independence for you, not even, sometimes especially not, the people who share your blood. Stay sharp, stay steady, and keep the lock on your own door, no matter how much you love the people asking for the key.